Repotting an orchid on Christmas Eve? Why not? This species, Phalaenopsis, is about to have a serious spa day. We're even going to get out the green potting tray. All of this and more coming up at The Orchid Hut. Welcome back to The Orchid Hut. My name is Dana, and thank you for joining me in this repot video. As I was filming that introduction, I noticed that my voice was a bit hoarse, and it still is. You know, I don't usually film so early in the morning, but it is Christmas Eve, and the rest of the day is going to be very busy, so I wanted to get this one out of the way sooner rather than later. It's a funny thing because in my last video I was kind of walking through some of my orchids and talking about whether or not you could actually repot them during the winter, and there were a number that could be repotted now. And you know, I was trying to decide which one to do first, and then realized that I was completely out of most of the pre-made orchid bark mixes that I use, and before I was really going to be able to repot many of them, I was going to need to reorder. So that's just a little reminder that if you have some repots on the horizon, you might want to check the media that you have on hand, because when I went to look at mine, there was far less of it than I remembered. So this particular orchid is one that I can repot for you today, because I did have some Phalaenopsis bark mix left, and I am going to be mixing in some sphagnum moss with that to make it a bit more water retentive, and I'll show you that when we actually get to the repot. So this was one of the ones that I could get out of the way, so let's go ahead and do this one. It's an interesting orchid because even though it is a Phalaenopsis, it is a species orchid, and the growth pattern, you know, at the top of the pot looks a bit different than your, you know, hybrid Phalaenopsis monopodial type growth, you know, with just one plant crown. So it's going to really be interesting to see what's inside this pot and to get a closer view at how this orchid grows. So, as usual, if you are enjoying this video or learn something new, please give it a thumbs up. If you're watching and haven't subscribed, please consider doing so. And of course, hit that notifications bell to let you know when I've posted something new. Okay, so a few other little preliminaries out of the way before we get the green potting tray out and take this one out of the pot. This one does have a bloom spike, and you know, I was really happy that it could bloom, because I was able to, you know, in that way see the color of the little bloom here. But I'm fairly certain that this spike is not going to produce any more blooms. So I am going to be cutting away this spike as part of the repot here. And I was just kind of curious about this bloom. And so I went online to research the bloom a little bit more. And one of the things that's unique and interesting about this particular bloom is that the sepals at the bottom are fused together in a way that is kind of unique to this orchid, and that particular adaptation does not typically carry forward into the hybridized Phalaenopsis orchids. And so as I was reading about the structure of this bloom, I found a 26-page article discussing all of the pieces and parts and, you know, all of the studies that they've done on this bloom. And after about 2 pages, my eyes kind of glazed over, and I thought, oh, okay, well, what I've gotten out of this is a lot more detail than I felt like I really needed to know. But, you know, in the wild, this orchid was dependent upon the ability of insects to pollinate it. So it has structures and adaptations that allow it to do that in the wild. And as we hybridized Phalaenopsis orchids, a lot of those structures and characteristics changed or sort of morphed into a different looking type bloom. So that's the summary of the 26-page article. Okay, so in case I forget to mention it later, I am going to be moving this into sort of a holy clay pot here. Very different from how this orchid is potted right now. So I will be very cognizant of, how to move this plant into a different potting setup and hopefully still have it thrive. One of the things that I read was to wait until this orchid has new root growth before repotting it. But as I'm looking at the top of the media, many of the roots are failing. I think it's in kind of that mucky muck, sort of very fine, kind of cocoa husk situation, which is probably going off a bit. And so down in the bottom of this pot, which is probably a bit too deep, I have put some corks to sort of raise it up in the pot a bit. Won't need quite as much media, and that will also provide some great air circulation at the bottom. This orchid is more of a terrestrial grower in the wild, so hopefully I'm going to make some good decisions here about repotting it for the upcoming growing season in 2024. Okay, I will be right back with the green potting tray, and we'll take this orchid out of its pot. Okay, so the first order of business is to cut this spike. I do have my little sharp pruning nippers here, all flamed and sterilized. This is a cute little bloom, but I think it's time to encourage this one to, go ahead and go into its growing phase here. I will put that little bloom in a small little vase here over to the side and just keep it in my bay window until it wilts completely. And this is going to be a complete surprise because I have no idea what's really here. I'm going to try not to knock the potting tray about too much because I know that gets all out of alignment with the camera. And it's in potting soil for the most part. I'm not even certain that this is any type of particular orchid mix. I think it's potting soil. I see tiny, tiny pieces of perlite, and at the same time I'm noticing that the roots are not enjoying this at all. I think it is probably, in my environment, staying far too wet, although I've only been giving it a trickle of water maybe every 10 days or so. And because these roots are pretty much done, it is, I guess, more clear why they're recommending repot when there's new root growth. This is making a gigantic mess. And this one is definitely going to require a ton of rinsing at the sink once I get most of this, what I would call basically dirt, off of here. As I'm looking at this root system, I'm not even certain how this one was hydrating itself. Broken leaf. Okay, this is going to require a great big rinse at the sink, and I'll bring it back when it's a bit more clean, and we'll have a closer look at the root system and get the entire plant trimmed up. I'm even, as I'm looking at this, maybe considering adjusting the media that I had planned, but as I'm rinsing it at the sink, I will think about that a bit more. you know, you can see that these roots are pretty much pulling away. All that's left are the threads, which means that the root is no longer viable. Okay, I will be back after this one gets a good wash down. Okay, so while I was at the sink, I pretty much changed up my entire game plan for the media to use when repotting this. The root system is in very poor shape. We do still need to cut away all of these old roots. I'm not, able to see, too far down, at the base of the plant just yet, because a lot of this needs to be cut away, but it's almost like, and don't quote me on this because I do not know this as a fact, but it's almost like this orchid has more of a rhizome situation. Okay, so let's just go ahead and start trimming away the dead roots. Now, as I'm doing this, a lot happened while I was not filming. I pretty much clogged up the kitchen sink with all of the debris that washed away. I mean, not anything that couldn't be easily fixed, but still, do be careful if you are rinsing your orchids inside the house, because a lot of times all of that debris is not great for your drain system. I went back into the secondary grow space inside the house to get my hydrogen peroxide and my water spray bottle, and in the process of doing that, my cat got accidentally locked up in that room because I keep that door closed. She didn't much care for that. She let us know after a while that she didn't want to be closed up in there. And she's actually a very good cat. A lot of cats get into things, but she really doesn't. She lays there patiently for a while, hoping that we'll notice what we did. And then when she's tired of waiting, she can have a very vocal meow. Okay, so the cat's out of the grow room. Then, when I was taking this out of the pot, even though I had that green potting tray there was a ton of soil that went onto the floor, so I had to get down on my hands and knees and wipe all that up. And it just goes to show that, you think you're going to do a quick orchid repot and it turns into more than what you bargained for. Oh, and then, because I was changing my mind about what to do as I was rinsing this one, I went out to the garage to see what other alternatives there might be for potting media. Because if you were watching at the beginning, you kind of know that I'm out of a lot of things and I'm waiting for my shipment to arrive, which should be right after Christmas. See, that even looked alive, but it just pulled away. So I did find some African violet mix, which looks promising. I found some bromeliad mix, which, bromeliads are also terrestrial, so I think that's going to be a good option. And I'm still going to use the clay pot that I showed you, and I'm still going to keep the cork in the bottom because it doesn't seem like, even when this one is growing well, it doesn't seem like it's a really deep-rooted type of orchid. So I'm going to leave that, but I think what I will do is, because I'll be using some finer media, I'll put a layer of sphagnum on top of the cork. And then that way that sphagnum will keep the finer particles of the media from falling through. Okay, this is unfortunately a extremely poor root system here. There's a lot of mushy stuff. Even after I cut away the dead roots, there's still like mushy stuff at the base. I probably will need to rinse it at the sink one more time just to get some of that out. Okay, this is still a mystery about how this grows. It's got sort of a hard, dense sort of structure right here that all of the vegetative growth seems to emanate from. But yet the vegetative growths are in sort of, you know, singular plants all attached to that one structure down at the bottom. I will have to research that a bit further, see if I can determine anything. Okay, so let's go ahead and trim this as well. These are very old brown stems from the previous year's blooming, so let's go ahead and cut that away while we're giving this orchid a spa day. Okay, and I imagine that if this plant were, you know, super healthy and large, that it probably could, you know, you could probably make divisions from it with 3 or 4 growths and then start a new plant that way. Sort of seems that way to me. I'm going to go ahead and remove some of the leaves down here that are yellowing. While not overdoing it. You see, there are some air roots here, you know, which are still viable. You can tell they're turning a darker green color because of the moisture from having been rinsed. Okay, so this is the next part of the plan here. I'm going to take this back to the sink. I'm going to rinse it one more time. I think I have trimmed all the roots that I intend to. Then I'm going to dry the base of this off just a bit, let it air dry for just a while. I will spray the entire thing down with hydrogen peroxide because there was a good bit of aged oak leaf, aged media down there. And then I will be back and we will put this one in the new pot. All right, be right back. Okay, so while the orchid is finishing up drying over to the side here off camera from the final rinse under the sink, let's go ahead and do our sort of preliminary pot prep. Okay, so there are some corks in the bottom of this clay pot. I'm going to leave that. Now, originally I had planned to use this Phalaenopsis pre-made mix with some additional sphagnum. I have changed my mind as I have been doing this, and I'm going to take the sphagnum out and I'm just going to put it on top of the cork because that will make a bit of a mat, a bit of a bedding, you might say, for preventing the finer media from just washing through when it rains or, you know, when I water the orchid later when it's outside. So I've put that sphagnum on top, and I think I'm just going to set aside the rest of this Phalaenopsis bark because I don't think that is the best choice here. Okay, so after this, I'm going to take my spray bottle and just spray the top of this sphagnum to wet it down a bit. Get some moisture in it because it was very dry. Rearrange it a bit. This is a great alternative for, you know, not having to have running water to dampen your sphagnum. And of course the clay pot is also very dry, so the clay pot is absorbing a good bit of the moisture. I'm almost thinking that that orchid was a bit too wet, at least in my environment during the growing season, in that pot that had no air circulation with that pretty much what looked like potting soil. Okay, so that's dampened. Now this is African violet potting mix. It appears to be very similar to this bromeliad pre-made mix. So I'm going to put a little bit of this in the bottom and probably just layer in this African violet mix because I really don't know what else I'm going to use this for anyway. Okay, now, as you might notice, this is a bit dusty, and some of it is coming through the holes in the clay pot. My solution for that, if it doesn't sort of settle in and stop at some point, would be to work in some pieces of sphagnum into the holes, and then it will act as a plug so that the smaller media doesn't fall out. Okay, now that's not quite to the top. I think, you know, there's not very many roots to work with on this orchid, so I'll be kind of making a bit of a tunnel here in the middle and then trying to set the orchid down inside sort of a little potting hole right here. All right, I will be back with the orchid. Okay, so the orchid has been sprayed with 3% hydrogen peroxide. One little thing to, I guess, think about if you spray your orchid with hydrogen peroxide is make sure it's 3% first of all. But I have never had an issue with spraying orchids with peroxide. A lot of growers don't think it's a good idea. I've never had a problem with it at all. But if you do it, make sure that the orchid is more dry than wet before you spray it. Because if you spray hydrogen peroxide onto an orchid that already is wet, that peroxide is automatically diluted and probably won't work for you, you know, if there's a certain reason why you're spraying it. So I always make a point to kind of blot dry the base of the plant, and then I even give it you know, a number of minutes to air dry a bit more before I spray the hydrogen peroxide, and then that way the peroxide is not diluted and basically ineffective. Okay, so before putting this orchid down into this is extremely dry media here. As I was working with it, there was like dust coming up and it was making me cough a bit. So it's very, very dry. And of course, after I get the orchid in here, I will water it in more thoroughly. Some of that moisture should keep the dust down. Okay, making a little well here for the base of this plant to sit in. And I'm not going to try to tuck air roots down at this point because I just don't think that that's going to be helpful. And then I have some of this over to the side. I will be getting down on my hands and knees and wiping the floor one more time when I'm finished with all of this. pressing in a bit, you know, a little bit, but not too much. Okay, almost done. You know, the biggest part of the work is getting ready to repot and making all of the decisions. You know, I did not Google or try to figure out how anyone else may have repotted this particular species, Phalaenopsis. I kind of operate a bit more just on my own instinct when it comes to stuff like that, because everyone's growing environment is different and you always have to take that into consideration. So, you know, while I try to make my videos as educational as possible, what works for me is not necessarily 100% in the exact same way going to work for you. So that's sort of where just experience comes into play and understanding your growing environment. Okay, lots of trial and error in my 10+ years of growing orchids. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, even to this day. All right, so there we have it, the finished repot. Let me get this out of the way. All right. Well, we will see how this does. I will make sure to give this a really good watering in, because it is more dry than moist right at the moment. And as always, if you enjoyed this video or learned something new, please give it a thumbs up. The subscribe button is coming up in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have a very, very happy holiday season with friends and family. And Merry Christmas, and I will see you all next year. Thanks for watching.